Welcome to Edible Education 101. You know, and you do know, for the last several weeks, we've had some speakers outlining the big picture issues confronting the food system currently. And some of you have been asking us, where are the solutions? I mean, they've been just bringing us these problems. Some of them seem really difficult. Some of you have even asked, where can we start? What can we do? And the response to that is that our speakers, this first part, were in fact answering a different question from how can we solve certain problems. They were actually answering the question of why do we need a food movement? And I hope that they've laid out for you some compelling reasons why we do need a food movement at this time. There was also there was a deeper reason, in fact, that they alluded to. Michael Pollan certainly did in his lecture behind what they were saying, and that is that the food system is very, very closely connected to culture. And so if there are problems with the food system, there are problems with culture as well, our culture. That's the underlying theme, in fact, to what they were presenting. This is what Nora Ephron meant when she said that Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma was a theory of everything. It's exactly what she meant, was that problems with the food system are problems with the culture. Now, in the first lecture, Michael recommended a book to you, The Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry, a series of essays, which he urged you all to read. And in fact, you did read one chapter from this book, which was the Ecological Crisis as a Crisis of Agriculture. There is a companion chapter, and it's entitled The Agricultural Crisis as a Crisis of Culture. And in that chapter, Wendell says the following: a healthy culture is a communal order of memory, insight, value, work, conviviality, reverence, aspiration. It reveals the human necessities and the human limits. It clarifies our inescapable bonds to the earth and to each other. It assures that necessary restraints are observed, that the necessary work is done, and that it is done well. A healthy farm culture can be based only upon familiarity with the land and can grow only among a people soundly established upon the land. So a healthy culture derives from a healthy farm culture. That's where it all begins. That's where agriculture all begins. And that's why we're turning to the second part of this course. We have 12 speakers who are going to answer your question of what can we do anything about these things? And their answer, I'll tell you their answer right now. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can do something about this. They're going to show you these things as they speak to you. And we could not have started better than with our speakers tonight, Rosato and Helen Atthowe. They run a farm which is nestled in the Sierra foothills on the side of the Sacramento Valley. 26 acres, I guess the slides tell you that already, on which they have more than 2,000 fruit trees, and they have wild turkeys, and they have beneficial birds and insects, and they have working farm cats. I like that, working farm cats. Cats that have a job to do. They'll tell you about that job. But they are very inspiring to hear. I've heard them speak before, and so I know this. I also was raised on a farm. My father was a farmer. My grandfather was a farmer, and my great-grandfather was a farmer, so I kind of know what they're talking about, but they do it better than any of my family members ever did. You're going to hear their story tonight. I think you're going to find it as inspiring as it is innovative. They've got some great ideas that they're making work. That farm's been there for, 35 years? It's been organic for almost all that time. This is a successful farm. It works. What they do works. You're going to hear the secret of their success tonight. So please welcome Rosato, Helen Atthowe.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks everybody for having us. This is quite an honor to get to tell you guys what it is that we've been doing at Woodleaf Farm all this time. I want to start with just how I started this farm back in the early and mid 70s. I started working on farms just out of high school. And then at about 20 years of age, started planting trees and picking fruit and started a grafting business and started saving some money. And after just a year and a half or 2 years, had enough of a down payment for an inexpensive piece of land. And that's what we were able to buy at that time, was the first 10 acres out of this 26 acres. And so now it's a contiguous 26 acres. But instead of buying in the valley, we chose to find some place that had, what we felt like was, nice forest around it. And so Woodleaf is that. It's the oak and pine forest, 1,300-foot elevation. So kind of above we get valley fog, but we're above the valley fog in the wintertime most of the time. And it's apart from other, main agricultural systems down in the valley, where it's just farmland just right up next to each other. We don't really have neighbors. We have oak and pine forest. And so it's a nice, just a nice place to be away and also to farm. But with that came some very shallow soil that it took a while to figure out, how to make this productive enough to actually make a living off of. And so right from the beginning, I spent a few years working off the farm, but by 1984, I started just farming, making enough of a living doing farmers market and wholesale at the time to make a living doing farming. And so we're going to go through just some of the strategies. I'm going to work on explaining the irrigation system and especially the soils, and a little bit on the disease control, and then Helen will take over with all of the wildlife and the insect life and how that kind of works. So the talk is about mimicking nature, which is, I don't think you can really mimic nature, but we're going to do our best to show you the systems that we've figured out that work with kind of the least. We're always looking for how we can do less. The farm is pretty much run by one man that comes up from Mexico for 4 months, 2 months in the spring. He's there right now helping do the spring pruning. And then he'll come in the middle of summer to help us with the bulk of the harvest, and then he goes back after just 2 months. And then last year was a pretty busy year. We had one other young college student, and so she worked with us, and so it was 3 of us in our 50s pretty much run the farm. And then Misha last year in her 20s, and she thought she was the strongest, but after not that many weeks of only getting 2 days off a week, and she said, "You guys never take a day off," and she couldn't quite believe that we were able to keep going. So the hardy farmer, I think there's some truth there anyway, and so she kept it together, and by the 3 months that she was there, she was strong, and she says, "I'm not sure I want this farm life. This is a lot of work," but she was incredible too. So mimicking nature and soil building without tillage. And so the NRCS came up with their soil initiative. And so it came up with these 4 premises of how to, take care of soil to the point where it's going to actually, you're investing in soil. It's getting better. You're not deteriorating the soil. So these are the 4 points that they came up with, and so I'm going to go through and explain kind of how we hit each point. And so I really like that their conservation service and they're explaining that these things, and a big part of this is not tilling. And so a lot of what we do are figuring out systems, even in our vegetable system, where we're not tilling. And so you can see the trees, and then you can see in between, we start out with, I seed a perennial clover that quickly gets taken over with weedy grasses and all kinds of things you would call weeds, like the curly dock that you can see in that picture in the left, and then also chickweed, and every season has different weeds, and Helen will talk more about the different kinds. But what we're with this shallow soil that we've got, it's a class 7 soil, and so they start out with 1 being great soil and 2 and 3 pretty good soils, and that's what most of the farmers farm with. Well, class 7 sounds quite a few grades lower than that, and indeed it is. And so what we have is just about a foot of soil, sometimes 2 feet, and then a big heavy clay layer, and then rock, and then in one of our fields just a healthy foot of soil and then rock. So it's a pretty weak field. So figuring out how to use, what most people in this country especially would consider marginal farmland and turn it into productive farmland. And so to me, it's pretty much all to do with how do you get that soil really working? So it starts with the soil. You hear that probably a lot, but it does seem to start with the soil. Let me go back just a second. So Helen's got her hand there on the curly dock, and so we just dug down and picked up one so you could see the root on that. And so the soil where we did that went a little over a foot, and then those roots go, another 6 or 8 inches. So they're working their way down into that heavier clay, pulling up nutrition, making air channels as they die. When we mow, some of those roots die, makes good air channels for life in the soil to feed on those roots, and then air to come down so that there's, all that life in the soil needs air. So by creating this diversity, living mulch with a diversity of different kinds of plants is really important. We don't plant it. It just seems to come in. The clover's the only thing, or clover and grass mix now is the only thing I plant. So then the other thing that we do is we apply different kinds of carbon sources. We don't add any manures or fertilizers that are potent fertilizers like feather meal or some of the other fertilizers. What we do are all carbon source materials, which I would have thought in my early years of farming that wouldn't have enough nutrition in it to give us a crop. But what I've found more recently is that all the numbers, you'll see some charts coming up, show that it's just like, wow, everything's building in strength, which is wonderful on this kind of a marginal soil that isn't marginal at all anymore. Actually, it's kind of wonderful. But what we're doing is we're adding different kinds of carbon. So a carbon that's like the grasses on the left picture, we just have mowed. The grasses just get into soil contact as best as they can, and then we turn on our micro sprinklers and try and water that in so it gets in contact with the soil. And so that's kind of a quick release fertilizer. Quick in our case, because it still has to get broken down by the organisms in the soil so that it can get released to the roots. But it's pretty quick. And then what we're doing right now is we have bloom. So the peaches are blooming and the apples and pears are starting. And so we're going through the peaches right now, which you can see in that picture on the right. And so there are the prunings. And so the prunings are, not very big, most of them. And so they'll just get mowed up and it'll be kind of a heavier carbon source. And then any of the firewood, you can see one little pile of firewood up there to the right. And so that is going to get pulled out of the orchard and not get mowed in. We could chip it or something, but we just use it as firewood. And so you've got different kinds of all surface applied, no tillage in the whole system. The orchard that we're looking at with the mowing, that's looks like about an 8-year-old orchard. So we go from 20 or 30 years between having to rotate from one kind of orchard to another kind of orchard. And so in that whole time, all we're doing is mowing. And so the minimal soil disturbance. So we only I've got a number of different kind of mowing systems, but it's just taking that living mulch with all that diversity of crops in there, weeds, most people would call them, but different grasses and clovers too, and then mowing them. And so the strategy in this picture is to just go under the skirts of the trees so that the sprinklers can get water out to the centers. The sprinklers are under the trees. And then I built this mower that'll kind of go underneath the skirts of the trees, but leave the middle. So that's the habitat that we're leaving down the middle. But again, no cultivation, so not turning the soil. what I found in the 80s when we did vegetable farming then too, was we'd till and we'd add as much compost as the orchard, and the organic matter kept going up a little bit, but the vegetables, it never did go up. It stayed, even though we were adding a fair amount of compost. The organic matter in the soil, the number that we would come up with was always, around 2%, never really building much higher than that. And so here's a picture of kind of the picture on the right there anyway, shows some serious pruning that we had to do right then, and so a lot of carbon. And so this is kind of a really, it's hardwood. Peach is kind of a hardwood, and then break that down as best we can with, that's just a rotary mower. I'll go over with one more rotary mower, try and break it down, get it in soil contact, again do the irrigation to kind of get it into soil contact, but that's all just irrigation. And then it doesn't take very long before you've got that high carbon, kind of really strong organic matter that now is going to be broken down slowly into humus. It'll take not very many months. In this case, our soil's pretty biologically active. There's just a lot of life trying to pull down whatever we're putting on top. Leo, the guy from Mexico that works with us, he's there pruning on the left, and so that's all leafier prunings, and so the stems will be higher carbon, but those leaves will have a lot of nitrogen in them. I'll go back through the same day usually that he's pruning, mow that in. That leaf part will go into the soil pretty quickly. The branches part will take a little longer. But as it's surface applied and working in, you've got these wonderful reserves of habitat for these organisms, all kinds of organisms. You'll have, places where there's a bunch of organic matter, and then you go underneath that and you look at what's running around there, and it says, Helen actually knows the names of a lot of these things that are running around there. I don't, but there's a lot of stuff running around. And then there's always something that's getting added. So soils, they're really active during the time of the year when there's the right amount of moisture, which we irrigate, so we kind of keep that always where we think we want it. But it also then some kind of a carbon source. When it's warm, that carbon source, those organisms are happy and they're moving around and they're able to eat that stuff and pull it down. And when it's cold, everything kind of slows down or stops, and it takes longer for that carbon source to get pulled in. But the leaves on these trees in the fall are coming down. The prunings will come down. We're kind of always pruning. So any time of the year there might be prunings that are getting mowed in. So it's always working its way in for 6 months or 8 months. In kind of spring, summer, and fall. Everything's working kind of quicker. But in the winter everything slows down. But we're always adding different kinds of compost or of carbon source. And so then this next picture is something that from that the early years of trying to figure out, well, what do I want to do with this soil test? And then I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, so what does this even mean? Where do I want to be with it? And so what are the numbers? Where do I want to get to? So generally farmers do soil testing, and they look at the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK, and they look at pH. But in reality, it comes up with there's 15 different things that we generally test for. And so of all of those things, there's going to be highs and lows. If you get excesses of any of them or you get too low of any of them, a lot of times it kind of creates imbalances in the soil. You don't get some nutrient into the plant because this other one's excessive, or anyway, there's balances that you need to play with. On our website, woodleaffarm.com, I have a 4 or 5 page handout that kind of goes through each mineral, if it's low or if it's high, what are you supposed to be looking for, how do you find an organic, what do you use as an organic mineral amendment to kind of change these things, and then where, in that handout, I kind of explain where I think, is a good place to be for balancing, where do you want that balance, and so it's just like our bodies want to have balanced nutrition. Well, these organisms in the soil, the trees ultimately need, I think, balanced nutrition to have disease suppression, insect suppression too. And so the stronger we can build these, any plant, but perennial plants that we mostly grow, the better everything is going to be. We'll have less problems that we have to contend with. So this soil probe is kind of showing at the one end, you can see the right on the surface is the first inch or so is a lot of organic matter, and as you work your way down, less. If you get all the way to the right, you can see the kind of subsoil that hasn't quite changed. Well, that's about 10 inches down, so we've got, looks like about 8 or 9 inches where there's enough oxygen getting down 8 or 9 inches that those organisms in the soil are really going to do pretty well. They're going to have a happy time working their way up and down, making exchange with roots so that the roots have better nutrition, and then they're going to have enough oxygen and food sources and carbon food sources that take time to break down. So what you're looking for, I think, is all stages of quick release carbon sources and longer term, lignaceous stuff that doesn't break down that quickly and turns into a humus that's going to be there for a long time. I mean, you read in the books, it's like generations or hundreds of years that this humus particle can have exchange sites. That might be pushing it, but I've definitely read 1,000 years once I read. Anyway, so soil balancing is something, and getting your organic matter to where it's really working for you. So one of our main off-farm input is yard waste compost. So, I think it was about 15 or 20 years ago, all of the dumps were mandated to half of their refuge had to be recycled. So the way they did it was anything green coming into the dump sites was, diverted off and then composted. And then sometimes some of the yards, do a good job of making a good compost that gets on the OMRI list, or a list that organic farmers can use. And so there's one close to us, about 20 miles away. And so we buy compost from this organically approved site and get this green waste compost, which has the branches, same as the orchard, the leaves, same as our orchard, and then grass clippings, which would be the grass that we mow, so not so different, but then composted, hauled onto the farm, and then we just put a dusting. You can see two of the pictures, the one with the leaves on it, the far left, shows just kind of what the dusting is on that leaf, which is 2 tons to the acre, and it really doesn't look like that much, and it isn't, but it really gives, you can just feel the trees, especially if they've been through a long hot season or the fertility, it's been a long wet spring, which we actually haven't had in a while. But if you get those times where things are leached out, you put on this little bit of compost and the trees really respond, or the vegetables. And so you can see the bottom right, just kind of the high carbon, you want to get it as broken down as you can, but you also want to see that it's from, woody material. And so since I've switched to just using this green waste compost, it's been where my organic matter has been able to go up, kind of considerably. I'll have an organic matter chart in a minute to kind of show what that does. But when I met Helen, and she was doing research on, I think, 6 or 7 organic farms. I think I turned into the 7th organic farm. She came to visit, and she was looking at my system and looking through my records and trying to figure out, all what I was doing. And she was like lit up and says, "Do you know you're a veganic farmer?" And so I said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, "Well, I'm vegan. It means that you're farming without using any animal products." And I said, "Oh, cool, I guess." So anyway, so I'm a veganic farmer, which is kind of cool. And so then one of the things that a lot of farms have issue with is they're adding back, fertilizers. And so nitrogen is one of the ones that, certainly green things up, and it's one of the things that farmers often pay a lot of attention to. And so what now that I'm one of the 7 farms that Helen's researching, and so anyway, I hear these academics talk about different systems, and I've heard this word leaky quite a bit. And so leaky nitrogen system means that you've got that nitrate nitrogen that goes into the groundwater, or that, goes off of the surface of the land and into the waterways. And so that first, back in the 80s when I used manure, you've got my highest numbers from way back there, and then generally I'm in the what most farmers would consider deficient nitrogen, but with the one way some soil scientists talk about it is closely coupled nitrogen. So it's kind of where you don't have a lot of nitrogen available, but there's enough different places for nitrogen around that the organisms break it off, and the bacteria fix some out of the air and pull it down. And there's different ways that it's around enough that you look at the trees. We'll get to more pictures of the trees, and they pretty much always look pretty good. And those wet springs, sometimes they're having issues, but in general, it doesn't take much. If anything, I think I overdo how much nitrogen I use. And then this is what got me, a lot of what got me going on all this, trying to figure out farming. It was the soil organic matter. So back in the, probably late 80s, early 90s, I started doing no-till. And then Helen did no-till for 20 years in Montana on a farm that she had there, trying to figure out what does that mean. And so what I found with no-till was you were able to, even in gardening, I did a quarter acre, half an acre of vegetables. We do a little bit more now. Anyway, that 2% organic matter, which was, kind of where I started at Woodleaf Farm, was able to go up, slowly. But 3 or 4 years down the line, you were able to double it. So we went from 2% or so to 4%. It was just like, that's significant. And then managing no-till, well, that's a different story. And so we've come up with, and I'll explain the system that we're using now for how we make it on our farm, relatively easy to do no-till. But you can see in this chart how it goes from, generally 2% or so, and then it keeps working its way upward. Now I've got a lot of fields at over 5 and 6%, and even the worst ones are, 3.5% and 4%. So doubling and tripling of organic matter is kind of what gets me most excited, actually. And so in each little bit of each percent of soil organic matter, you release all of this nutrition. So for each time I get another percent of organic matter, I've got more of a reserve of nutrition that can go into those plants without having to add anything. But by adding something, I can keep that organic matter stable or rising. And so that's the plan, is just to keep adding back our woody, branches and grasses, and then the little bit of compost. The 4 tons per acre of compost is what we've been adding lately, and it's, if anything, a little too much, but it's pretty inexpensive, and everything really likes it, but we actually have to do more pruning because we probably have a little more vigor than we need. And so then we were part of this group in Massachusetts that it was Northeastern University. And so they took 900 samples last summer and were trying to figure out another way to kind of what is stable organic matter? How do you think about organic matter in a way that it isn't just a cycling of nutrients? So you put that grass in, and it pretty quickly, gets used up. And so you might call it organic matter, but really it's just a quick fertilizer. And so you take that woody stuff, and so it's just like, okay, well, that's going to take a while to break down. And in my best scenario, it goes down to a humus particle that stays there 1,000 years. But in any case, you've got that longer term carbon. So what this is showing is that our native soil, which should have pretty good humification, I would guess, is showing one number, and then our field that's about an 8 or 10-year-old field, the red number on the left of the high bars there says 58, same as the native soil, and then a 20-year-old field shows a little bit higher. So this is new to Helen and I, trying to figure out, okay, is this the way to look at kind of a more stable, longer term organic matter? Maybe so, and so we'll keep looking into this, but it was kind of exciting to see that they seemed to expect lower numbers if you had tilled fields, and that you wouldn't ever get close to a native soil. But in our case, it's like, okay, we're as good as native soil and even a little better maybe. And so then the disease part, it isn't like that organic farming and you make a healthy soil and that every problem is gone. Not at all. And so back in the 90s, 92 through 96, I got a number of funding cycles through Organic Farming Research Foundation to look at brown rot, which is a big problem for peach growers, chemical or organic. And with organic, there are more and more biological sprays that you can add, organisms kind of going against brown rot that, maybe they work. Since I did that research, what I found was that by spraying a mix of the minerals, especially the ones that were a little bit low in my soil tests, and spraying those on brown rot's most problematic at bloom. And so if I sprayed these minerals at bloom, then it just put a coating over those blooms that are nice and sugary, and brown rot's really a strong, fungus that'll, take that bloom and just strike it, eat it all up and grow and then sporulate and move. And it has, so besides cultural practices, taking the mummified fruit that dries up, getting it out of the orchard at the right time, or getting it in ground contact in the middle of summer, Anyway, so putting on these mineral sprays, actually it was all I needed to do. Timing was important too, before a rain, often enough if it's a really rainy, if high humidity, and it's warm. I mean, there's a lot of parts to this that I'm not going to quite explain all of it. But generally it was just mineral spray, so pretty basic, same minerals that I used soil applied. And then another one that's just been hitting us lately, so everything isn't all rosy at Woodleaf, has been fire blight. So fire blight, I've never used antibiotics, but that was an organically approved material, and so that's been taken off the list as of this year or last year. So this year, farmers are having to figure out, as an organic farmer, what can they do. And so you're looking at Bosc pears there on the left, and we just have had enough trouble with Comeece and Bosc and Bartlett that as they are getting fire blight, I'm sawing them out of the orchard and replanting the areas with resistant varieties. And so there's a variety that's my favorite anyway called a Warren, and so I'm planting more of those. And they've barely ever had a strike at all. And I'm going to go, I've been doing different biological sprays for fire blight, but not completely successfully, so I'm not that thrilled. And then another thing is with the peaches. Well, the peaches, the climate seems to be changing. We have some issue, not so much at our farm, because we're at 1,300 feet and it gets a little bit cold, but chill hours in California for sure is becoming more of an issue. Some of the varieties that need 700 or 800 chill hours, anything below 45 degrees counts, every hour counts as one chill hour. We don't get enough of those to get up to 750 anymore. So some of the varieties that we've been growing, and really good varieties, might not be low chill enough. So my friend, who's a peach breeder, and I've been down to Mexico a number of times to give talks at his conferences down there, has come up twice now and helped me do breeding and figure out what are the disease resistant, but also the most flavorful, and what's going to make a lower chill. And anyway, he's brilliant. And so he was just here last week doing a lot of breeding. And so Salvador's there working on adding some pollen to a peach. And so some of the strategies of, okay, you can't rest on your laurels, not that we have any, but that, we got to keep going and figuring out what's going on. And so then what's lovely about Woodleaf is we're up in the Sierra foothills, and right above us is this small lake, Lake Wyandotte, that takes a 3,000 acre, all the hills behind it. It works out to about 3,000 acres of a drainage area that flows into this small lake that feeds a couple farms. I think it's like 2 or 3 farms my size, so it's just a small ditch. But it's enough that we're able to put on 2 irrigations a week, so we're keeping that biology in the soil kind of not too wet but moist, so all those organisms in the soil are happy. They're able to get air. They don't get so saturated that the air goes away, but they get water and they get air, same as us. It's needed for them to survive and thrive. So we put on those 2 irrigations with our micro sprinklers, and it works out to about an inch, a little over an inch, probably twice a week. So a little over 2 inches a week is what we give them. So it's a fair amount of water, but it's also, where it is. It's gravity flow water. We don't have to pump it because it's about 80 to 90 feet above us where the lake is. It comes into a pipe and we get it under a little bit of pressure. So nice having, it's got a lot of algae in it, so we have to filter that out. But otherwise, it's a great to have enough water to do this kind of farming. If you were to do drip, on this land, it would be a much more, it'd be meager how you would be able to get that soil to really get going. So here we're able to use that 2 inches or a little more than 2 inches a week and really get the soil, make it happy, keep it growing. And as we keep it kind of investing, and feels like that it keeps getting a little better all the time. And so we're not degrading it, we're improving it is what I think. And so when we have about probably closer to 10% vegetable production on the farm, and so I'm always rotating out. Like peaches only last about 15 years, and then you need to rotate out to the next crop. And so what we do, like this was a field that I took 30 trees out last fall, or fall before last now, and got and put in, so took it all out, got the soil kind of amended to where I wanted it, changed it around a little bit, added a cover crop of the New Zealand white clover, a perennial clover, and so seeded that in October and put the irrigation in, and so then came in in the spring and just did one tillage pass, or actually I think I went back and forth, so 2 tillage passes. And that'll be all this field will get for the next 5 years. We'll be able to grow vegetables on it in the spots where I tilled. And I'll put a trellis system in, you'll see in the next slide. And then right after that 3 to 5 years while we're growing these vegetables, we'll switch and we'll then put in back to orchard without having to do any more prep. We can leave and just pull out the posts from this trellis system. So here you can see the trellis in the first year of growing on the trellis, and it's nice solid clover. And then the trellis, the cucumbers are going up, and without really having to manage the clover this year at all, it starts to grow back into the cucumbers about the time the cucumbers are tall enough to have it not even matter. So the first year is kind of free. You did that tillage and planted the seed and put in this trellis system, and no problem, everything goes pretty smoothly. It seems like we've been able to do this system with cucumbers. Cucumbers are a tricky one. They get diseases built in. We don't add them the second year. We don't plant in the same soil cucumbers again. We switch over to different crops like on the trellis system. It's amazing how the eggplant and the peppers, even though you wouldn't think of them as trellising plants, you put them in the row and then you kind of help them kind of go up, and you can get eggplant up 4 or 5 feet, and you can get peppers up to 7 feet. And they just kind of work their way up, and good quality. And by then the grasses are moving in, and you're starting to get some more competition. And so we're then starting to use different kinds of mulch. We have a mower that harvests grass out of the middle of the orchards, and we take that mulch and we side dress these rows, or put it right over the rows in the winter, pull that back so that then we can put our transplants in or plant a seed, depends on what the crop is. On the trellis we do pole beans, tomatoes, the eggplant, the peppers, and seemed like there was one other thing, but anyway, so that makes it easy kind of to do vegetables because they're going up and we're 6 or 7 feet apart. I've done no-till, and Helen did quite a bit of no-till or minimal till, where you're in beds and then the living mulch is trying to creep back into the beds, and you're kind of managing a different way. It's possible too, but it takes a little, the trellis system makes it easy. And so we do just farmers market sales, a little bit of restaurant wholesale, but for the most part we just do farmers markets. And so we need to have really nice high quality, really good flavors is kind of the main of it. Is it's like if people get good fruit from us, they'll come back. And so we generally, and then just it's fun. I don't know, I like doing farmers markets. Helen likes doing farmers markets, and so we do pretty much about four a week, sometimes up to 7 a week, to be able to move all of our produce. And this is for about 7 months of the year. We're at market selling our vegetables, so we kind of line it up to where we've got everything kind of coming on together, and by the time the pears are gone, so is pretty much everything else, and then we get most of the winter to kind of just chill out and get ready for the next season pretty much. And so then so my part of this is about over, and so what is it that we learned here was, to me, that the health in the soil is super important, and that with our philosophy of spraying as little as we can get away with, we are always looking at what's going on here. Both of us are very interested in learning more about what's going on and why are these systems working or not working. And so that interest level, it's because I do probably 5 or 6 different things for an hour or two, all day long. I'm switching around different jobs, but they're all, kind of manual, keeping me in shape kind of jobs. I don't go to the gym, by the way. And so it's, kind of keeps you engaged without being just the same thing all day. So I love that. I love the farming of it because it's, but keeping us involved and interested and going forward in it is important too. And so to continue this dance that we're doing with nature, and the interest level that we carry with us from that, I think will keep us going for quite a while. And now I'll turn it over to Helen.
So how many of you are farmers out there? Okay, a few. How many want to be farmers? More. How many want to be researchers about agriculture? Okay, all right. How many people eat? Okay, so we basically have a place to start from. You heard about the soil building dance, and now what I'm going to talk about is how we let nature help us manage insect pests. And basically, whether you look far from the orchard into the forest, which is very close, actually, right on the margins, or whether you look into a spider web in one of our trees in the orchard, nature is never very far away at Woodleaf, and that's what I love about the place. So we work really hard to mimic nature where we are, which is in the Sierra foothills, where most of the biomass, most of the plant community is oak trees and pine trees and some shrubs, and then during the wet season we have grasses and wildflowers that during the dry season get pretty dry. But the flowers and the grasses are a natural understory that looks very much like what Carl was talking about, huh? And what about our neighbor orchards? What's the difference? Can you see? What are they not doing that Carl talked about with his soil building mimicking of nature? They're not covering the soil as much, are they? And that turns out to be something that's really important to our pest management system. Because as we work really hard to mimic nature, we're really mimicking ecosystem function. So we're trying to do ecological farming and creating habitat for what I like to call our free ecosystem providers. And by that I mean pollinators and beneficial insects that feed on pests. And there's one of them right there in the corner. We've got a robin in our early spring orchard. So what we're doing is trying to create above and below ground habitat. And above ground habitat is some of those, what other people call weeds, flowering to provide habitat for beneficial insects, predators, and parasites. I'll talk a lot about them in a minute and introduce you to our family. We also have under the ground, under that undisturbed perennial living mulch that Carl talked about, we have this whole other web of life going on. We have our microorganisms and our soil food web, so to speak. We have fungi, bacteria, actinomycetes, earthworms. We have protozoa. Anybody ever heard of mycorrhizae? Yeah, good. We have mycorrhizae down there too. So we're creating not only above ground habitat, which is easy to think about because it's right in front of us, but below ground habitat too. And all of that habitat building is leading us to this ecosystem function, this important farm function, which is insect suppression. And I could spend a lot of time with real nerdy science discussion about this whole intricate web in and of itself, this creating habitat so that insects feel at home. But I'm not going to. If you're any entomologists here, there's not a soul of you who's an entomologist. So good thing I'm not going to talk about this. We just did a webinar at the Veganic website if anybody wants to really get into all the details. But let's look at what's going on at Woodleaf. So you know what's going on here. We've got the soil covered. We're letting that perennial living mulch flower. And what happens is that by not disturbing it, by not tilling it, we have year-long cover for ground-dwelling predators like spiders and carabid beetles. I'll talk about them a little bit more here. And we have pollen, nectar, seeds, and sap that provide food for parasites and predators of pests. And in fact, as we've been studying our system, we've found that some of these so-called weeds actually seem to be the preferred pollen sources or food sources for some of our most important predators. These beautiful creatures are syrphid flies. They're two different species, and I'm just going to walk over here and see if my mic is still working. This is chickweed, their favorite. This is speedwell, a second favorite. So Thank God we don't have to plant this stuff. It comes for free. Create habitat and they will come. By the way, do you know how you tell different syrphid flies apart? Isn't that a beautiful pattern? It's art right there. It's nature mimicking art. So another thing, let's go back. Another thing that we have found that's, I think, key to our success in pest suppression or insect suppression is that we create habitat right in the orchard, right in the crops. It's interspersed. We don't plant what people call insectaries on the edge of our agricultural fields or hedgerows on the borders of our fields. We have them right in between where our crops are because we don't want our predators and parasites to just visit us and then go back home to their habitat. We want them to stay and live with us. This turns out to be actually really important because a lot of the insect ecology research is showing us that in fact some of our most important predators and parasites aren't moving very far, and parasitic wasps, syrphid flies, and lacewings in one study only went about 76 meters from their habitat. So we think it's really important to have habitat where your crops are, to figure out how to do that. So, of course, we could just say create habitat and they'll come, but we've gone out and counted and monitored to see who's really there and who's actually getting the work done for us. And in 2013 and 2014, we went out and scouted weekly for different species of predators and parasites. And look at this beautiful web. We are reattaching threads back to the web of nature, and look at the threads going up and down. We have different predators that live in our orchard in that undisturbed perennial living mulch year-round. These are the ground-dwelling resident predators, and I'd like to introduce you to some of them because they're my favorites. So meet the beetles. Here they are. We've got rove beetles, very strong predators. We've got carabid beetles that eat worms, lepidopteran insects. And Carl used to have problems in the orchard with several lepidopterans or worms. Have you ever bitten into an apple and found a worm? This guy will eat them, so you don't have to find them. And then we have more than 15 different species of spiders already identified at Woodleaf. In fact, we have so many that I've been thinking about doing a pinup calendar with one spider per every month. And these beautiful wolf spiders are really strong worm predators as well. They eat almost everything, actually. And I can't quite reach, but way up there you can see that little jumping spider on the peach. They're eating thrips that was one of the last pests that we had to spray for, and now we're not. So these guys are really important. We also have predators and parasites that come and go a little more in the orchard, like another one of our syrphid flies down there, and these aptly named assassin bugs. And here's a predator. You can see that with our weekly monitoring, their populations are rising and falling. But look at this little peak here. This is a predator that nobody even talks about as a predator. Nobody even mentions them as being important in agricultural systems. But as we've monitored them, they come in early in the spring when our pluots are blooming and we have aphids in our pluots. These guys come in huge numbers, and when the aphids are gone, their populations kind of diminish, and they just sort of hang out and look for aphids. But if we ever need them, a few of them are still there, but others go on, and we don't know where. They just move to maybe another aphid system. So I've introduced you to some of our free ecosystem providers. Is what they're doing really working? How do we know? Well, we've looked at what Woodleaf has sprayed in terms of organic insecticides since the late 1990s. And as you can see, that in the late 1990s through the early 2000s, Carl sprayed for worms, particularly worm pests, but into the last years and all the way up to 2013, we stopped spraying hardly at all, not very much. And then in 2014, we didn't spray at all. So are we stupid? Do you think it's a reasonable idea to rely on just those biological control organisms to provide habitat? I mean, to provide pest suppression for us? What do you think happened to our yields? Well, 2013 and 2014, the average clean fruit in the field was 90%. And in fact, last year, Carl, with great glee, told me it was his economically most lucrative year ever in the entire history of the farm. And we didn't spray a thing. However, everything is not rosy, as Carl said at Woodleaf. When you work with biology, the devil is always in the details. And we have a new pest, showed up in about 2008, that's Drosophila, which is a spotted winged Drosophila. And basically, we didn't spray for them last year, and we had a light crop of cherries, so we decided we could get away with it. But of that light crop, they took 30% of it. So we haven't figured out yet what to do, but we're watching the system closely, and we have faith. We'll see. So I showed you the habitat building. I showed you the biological control organisms, or some of them that are involved. We saw that the spraying decreased and that we still had good yields. But most importantly, I want to point out that when you're dealing with an ecosystem, when you're trying to reattach to the web of nature, you can't have zero tolerance for weeds or zero tolerance for pests. So we figure, excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip and see if I can get rid of this. We figure we always are going to see about 10% damage in our system. And on my farm, I did similar things, relied on biological control, and 10% damage seemed to be pretty much in the range of what I would expect every year. So I've come to think of 10% damage every year as our tithing to nature, so that we can rely or remain in the web of nature. And the glorious thing about that is that we set ourselves up then to reconnect in other ways, to reconnect back to the human community or our clients. So we get a very good price for our fruit. And it's really nice to be able to offer some imperfections. And as we accept imperfection, it gives our clients a chance to buy bargain basement prices for good organic fruit to maybe can with or make pies, or they just don't want to spend the money on the more expensive fruit. So do you see how reconnecting the threads to the web of nature brought us into an even bigger web, perhaps? So that's our farm plot. That's how we're weaving Woodleaf's web, from the birds on the ground, our wild turkeys, to bluebirds that are also eating worms that attack some of our crops, to the garter snake weaving its way through Brussels sprouts and eating aphids along the way, I might add, to all those spiders. There's another one of the pinup spiders, and even to tiny parasitic wasps that attack these green aphids and lay eggs, and then the eggs hatch and eat their ways outside from the inside out, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and all that's left is a shell. These are all part of Woodleaf's web of nature that we're trying to reconnect to. And we don't have all the answers, but one thing we think may be a universal truth, When you kill something, you inherit its job. When you cut a thread in the web of nature, the web weakens and parts of it can collapse. So we're continuing to learn how to manage within nature's web at Woodleaf. And sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes you really just create habitat and they will come, like that swarm of honeybees that is swarming in one of our apple trees. But other times we have to work hard at understanding what is going on in the ecosystem, what are the ecological rules, and one of them is that biodiversity is messy. And so we have farmers that come and look at this in the summer and say, oh my God, I can't look. Because clearly we do not have zero tolerance for what other people call weeds, would you say? And yet, see that curly dock in there? It's probably about 3 foot tall. But look closely. What's inside the seeds of that curly dock? Look, ladybugs. And there's that soldier beetle I was telling you about that's such a strong aphid predator. So what do you suppose they're doing in the middle of summer in the weeds in our undisturbed perennial living mulch? Well, I like to think that they're just there eating what's in the living mulch and waiting just in case we need them, in case we get an outbreak of insect pests in the orchard. If we had to, at that point, bring them in, there would be a lag time. But we never have a lag time. A problem starts, and sure, we're going to get a little bit of damage. How much are we probably going to get? 10%. And we'll accept it, won't we? Especially some of you guys that like to, there's people sitting right here up in front that buy the cheap fruit from us. I know who they are. So it's a matter of balancing everything, including ourselves in the ecosystem. So in our ecosystem. So our pollinators hate spraying. We have so many beautiful pollinators. We try not to spray very much. And in fact, that's one of the reasons in 2014 we decided we're just not going to spray at all. And then our resident predators and parasites, there's a parasitic wasp in the top left, and spiders, and everybody knows the red guy. They hate tillage and they hate mowing. So we try to do as little bit of tillage as possible, and we balance habitat building, soil building that Carl talked about, and economics. So over here is early in the spring, and we're moving more towards habitat building. You can see we've only mowed this little area around the sprinkler and let everything else bloom because, well, when the habitat gets too high for the sprinklers, that can be a problem. Then over here, there's Carl's soil building. We're recycling nutrients in our carbon and nitrogen system by cutting the living mulch, and that looks like about 2 tons, maybe more, 2 to 3 tons per acre of hay being added to the system. And yet, sometimes we have to balance towards the economic side, and here we are mowing all but about 30% of the habitat because we are making areas for the cold air to drain so that we can protect tender little developing fruits from frosty nights. So you can see the balancing act within this woodleaf web and the web of nature. Lots to go on, and one of the things that we're still learning about is birds within woodleaf's web. We know that these flycatchers on the right and these black-eyed juncos come in flocks at certain time, and they spend a lot of time in the orchard. And we know that black-eyed juncos particularly, half of their summer diet is insects. So we think that these guys are a really important part of our ecosystem and are reconnecting back to the web of nature. And so this is a big problem that I need your help with. Recent fears of the new food safety regulations may cut some of the threads in nature's web. as it turns out, farmers in California are already so concerned that in a 2007 survey from Monterey County, it turns out that 40% of farmers have removed wildlife from their fields on the recommendation of food safety auditors. 30% have eliminated non-crop vegetation from their farms. Do you know what that means? That means habitat building. They've removed all the habitat building that I've just been talking to you about. And 7% have bulldozed in ponds. So there's some balancing to get us back into nature's web that I need your help with. Carl and I, all of us farmers, need the help of eaters everywhere to say, wow, you know, we want food to be safe, but we need more research, and we want to make sure that we're not getting rid of one thing because we have fears for food safety. So I hope that if any of you are surveyed or have a chance to comment, that you'll remember how important habitat building is. So in the end, what we're really doing at Woodleaf is, instead of just managing specific crops, we're really monitoring and managing relationships in the entire web at our farm and the entire web of nature. And how far can we take our farm back into the web? And I mean the web of nature there, of course. So Carl, in his ultimate patience, has given me a half acre to play with, and we're trying to develop the Woodleaf Forest Farm. And it's not quite ready for prime time yet, but we're getting some wonderful results. So what we're trying to do is continue to leave that perennial living mulch, lots of biodiversity cover, but we're also growing annual vegetables like that cabbage and mixing it in with strawberries and artichokes, and we're eating very well. So that's another story. Maybe in a year we'll be able to tell you that this is a productive system for us as well. So to finish, I want to say that it's been so important to us to put ourselves back in the web, not just for the biological reasons, but because as we reattach ourselves to the web of nature, we realize that we're growing a diet. And we're eating a sunshine-powered, phytonutrient, plant-rich diet, and we feel healthier. And so to finish, oh, what a tangled web we weave when we try to disconnect farm health, human health, and nature. And reconnecting them not only brings us a biological system like we've described today, but also is bringing us better health and making us nicer, as my family in the front row will attest. So thank you for listening, and I also want to thank the funding agencies who have helped us do all of this nerdy research that we've reported on that help us understand our system, and that's the USDA Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education organization, Fruit Guys Community Fund, Rodale Your 2 Cents program, and the Organic Farming Research Foundation. So thank you for that, and we hope that other farmers and that you, young minds, will go out and help answer some of the questions that we don't have the answers to yet. So we're ready for questions. I hope you have some. Oh boy. Oh, you're going to do it.
How does water use differ between using perennial mulch and a non-cover crop farm?
So she's asking what's the difference between cover cropping and living mulch in terms of
water use.
Water use. Yeah. Do we both want to address this?
No, go ahead.
So in my farm in Montana, I experimented with drought-tolerant living mulches, and I didn't have as much success, but like Carl, I had a good source of gravity flow water, so I was never forced to do it. We know that by having soil covered, and by having organic residues added like a mulch, that we're able to increase soil organic matter and increase water holding capacity. We know that when we till soil, which you do for a cover crop, you till a cover crop in. That's the difference between a living mulch and a cover crop. It ultimately is incorporated into the soil. We know that every time we incorporate into the soil that we degrade a little bit of soil organic matter. So I think it depends on the soil type and it depends on the crop you're growing. I think that we could get away with irrigating a little bit less because the soil organic matter has increased. And at my farm, I started working on that, but I didn't get far enough with it to be able to give you any quantitative assessment of which would be different. I will tell you that in Montana, some of the scientists that I work with in wheat production looked at tilling and leaving a winter fallow. We left it fallow in the winter so that we could collect snow and rain, and the idea was that that would increase the water in the soil because we're talking about areas that were getting about 11 inches of precip every year. And what they found was that actually a system that added organic residues and didn't till was, over time, as soil organic matter levels built up, holding more water than the winter fallow. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but I think your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to write a grant and study that. Do you want to address that at all?
I would rather not use less water because what I'm going for is keeping the organisms happy. So don't overwater, don't underwater, just give what you think is the right amount. It's nice to have enough water to be able to do that. If I had to farm a different way with the soils that we have, it would be difficult to farm with half the amount of water and get anywhere close to the same production. If we had to, we could figure out systems that would still give us production, but it's nice to have abundant water, and we do, so we use it.
Good question, though, an important question in these times.
Yeah, we have a question from one of our viewers. Were either of you influenced by the macrobiotic writers who were writing about 40-50 years ago, and I guess more broadly, who were your influences?
Well, Helen's got some great ones because she went out and searched for who those people were. I, kind of followed Rodale and how they said compost, 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 which ultimately was kind of not the right track. But it was on the right track, but it didn't really pull in the, how the minerals work together, which, I found to me was a very important piece. I sold to the macrobiotic community in Oroville, had a center that they had people come, but Herman and I can't remember, they were famous people, but I can't remember who they were. But Helen can talk to a few people that she studied under that were the pioneers of ways to do things, Fukuoka especially.
Yeah, when I was as young as some of you in this room, in my early 20s, I was lucky enough to study briefly with Masanobu Fukuoka, and I worked in Northeast Georgia with folks who had worked with Masanobu Fukuoka, and that was eye-opening. Another important opening of my mind to ecology was spending a year at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, and being forced by Wes Jackson to read Plant Population Biology and Ecology, which forever changed the way I look at agriculture. I hope I'm not forgetting somebody important. I probably am, but that's what happens when you get to be our age. Did that answer the question? Oh, macrobiotics. Brief flirtation with macrobiotics in my mid-20s.
So, as a lot of us know, and we've been talking about earlier, there's a lot of subsidies for commodity crops which don't go to people like you. So what could you do if you were subsidized by the government to grow your crops? And also in terms of the products that you produce, you were talking about how they're pretty expensive. Is there any way that you could expand your growing and selling to those who can't afford higher priced crops and, expand the business, whatever, expand the farm? So can you speak to this?
Well, speaking to this farm, the Woodleaf Farm, we've actually had to limit our production model to take into account the expense of all the labor. And so by doing most of the labor and figuring out how to mechanize pieces of it, we've kind of been able to shortstop that part of, but it's darn expensive in this country to make a living, pay all of the different things. There's taxes everywhere, there's fees everywhere. And it just is expensive to run a business. So it's nice that we can come to the Bay Area or our local markets, Chico and around us, and charge a decent price so that we don't always have a great year. I mean, we've had 2 good years in a row, that's great, but we've also had a few totally failed years that we just had to scramble around to make money out of just the vegetables, and the fruit wasn't making the money that year. So it's a tricky question to answer, just because you're always looking at the economic model. I've been doing this 35 years on the same farm, and never having anybody to say, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. There's money here." No, I had to worry about it every year and make enough money to make it a go of it. 35 years in, everything's paid for. It's all there. And okay, now finally, it's just like close to retirement age, you can start to take some ease. Well, that's the idea, but it took a lot. You have anything to add to that?
Well, I really like the question because I think that we won't find more ecological ways of farming until we answer just that question. So what would make it easier for other farmers to move into the direction of ecological farming? I think that there's risk, and I think farmers are afraid of risk. And so I can't remember, my brain is shot, the guy from Maine that... Elliot Coleman. I was in a room of researchers once with Elliot Coleman, and he said, well, really what you need to do is just find the 5 best farmers in the area and that are already good farmers and just pay their transition. And he was talking about transition to organic, but I thought, wow, what a great idea. If you took some of the best farmers, I can think of, 20 of them just that we know in California, and paid their transition to a more ecological model, that might help us figure out how to do these things that Carl and I figured out how to do on our own dime, except for all the research folks who've helped us, but those have been really small, really small grants. So, take out some of the risk, and then your other important question: how to make it more economical. And so on my farm in Montana, my costs were a lot lower farming in Montana, and I could sell things more cheaply, but it still was on the high end of a supermarket as opposed to, a high-end farmer's market. I want you to answer that question for me because we are old and we've done all the biological stuff, but it's important.
Well, we're being regulated into different systems. The water, there's a whole drainage area that we're part of, and so with that drainage area on the water board, they're making us come up with a plan of how are we mitigating our runoff off of our farms. So that kind of a program is coming down the line. I don't know when it'll come, but it'll be the same kind of thing for soil quality, I think, of how are you, working towards building, more organic matter is better, good organic matter especially, And so that's something I'm very interested in, is how do we get there as a country or as a state to begin with. And there's talk of it. I'm kind of working with different people trying to figure out, okay, so how do we get this to go forward? We hate more regulation, and yet they're always giving us more regulation, so it's likely to be something to do with, okay, what's your plan? How are you going forward to not just have a 0.5% organic matter, but to raise it? If we could raise organic matters just 1% worldwide, which is huge, but it's not very much. I mean, we've gone up 4 and 5% on our farm, without it taking a toll on us. In fact, everything gets better. So if we could just raise one, I've heard all kinds of numbers, how much the carbon will come out of the air and how much we'll get that if you can sequester it in the soil and keep it in the soil. And so our system, it's just like, okay, we open up just barely any, so we're off gassing and losing organic matter where we till, but wherever we're not tilling, we're gaining. So, so some system's going to be coming along. I'm looking at what that can be and trying to help advocate for it. I'm not sure yet what it is.
Just one other little point, and I'm going to flip. I thought that someone might ask questions about my farm. So there's my system, and you can see that the tomatoes are a little closer together, but when I got older, I kind of moved to what Carl was doing because of the labor. If I decrease the labor right now is the biggest expense that farmers pay. And so I did the same thing that Carl has done on his farm. I made areas big enough that I could take my tractor and I could just mow, and that was my weeding. So no weeding, no real fertilizing, and no spraying, so I could really cut the cost. But still, I can't compete. I could not compete with a farm that I worked on as a consultant for a year in 2011, 2,000 acres, organic farm, with a 5,000 member CSA. And I was unable actually to help them move. I was hired to and was unable to help them be more ecological because we were so mired in the marketing system, and we had a 300 to 400 person labor crew. So I brought all that up, and Carl's brought that up, but I don't think we have total answers to that remarkably important question. Do we pick them, and then you'll have a...
So I'm interested in two ratios you have. One is, it seems like you have about 4-to-1 natural forest to cultivated land and like 8-to-1 orchards versus vegetables. Can you talk about that strategy? Is that because that's all you really want to grow, or do you need it as habitat, or can you comment on those questions?
The lay of that particular land is there are places where there's a foot of soil, and then mostly places where there's rocks as big as this room. And so you're not going to plant on that rock. So we could pretty much just go where the natural small fields were without taking out hardly any habitat of oaks or anything and just leaving what was on the edges. We were able to come up with 7 or 8 acres that we farm. Pushing past that, we'd have to take out too much forest. It's not in my nature to, I don't mind taking one tree out to make a whole field, but to take out a whole forest to make a field, I kind of rebel at that point. It's like, okay, there were already meadows, somebody had grazed it with cattle before, and there wasn't a lot coming back in those fields, and so that's where we planted. And we're now to the, it's like, okay, how do we make everything simpler and not more complex so we're not going to get bigger? So, and what was the rest of
the orchards versus
the vegetables? And so the orchard and the vegetables, it's nice when you take out a peach orchard, especially, or any orchard, and not go, if I want to go back to peaches, and I have a few good fields, the higher fields that are the best peach ground because they air drain the best, they don't get frost as much. So those will go back to peaches more than likely. Well, there needs to be 3 to 5 years of cleaning them up with vegetables, and so different vegetables stay out of the peach system, go back to peaches, and then there should be, I've never experienced replant problems, and so with that kind of a system, you shouldn't experience replant. So, or we'll switch, but we're always, it's an orchard system. I, did vegetables in the beginning, and it was bent over all day long, was not what I loved. And so what I loved was what I do, because it's like, okay, you got to kind of follow what you're going to have fun with. Otherwise, how long are you going to stay in it? So we continue to do that. We figure out things that we like, and we expand those, and we get rid of things that even if they're making money, if we don't like them, they're gone.
I'd like to just address that too from a little bit more of a scientific perspective, which we don't have the answers to, by the way. But I think it's important to ask how much habitat is necessary. So one of the farms I'm working with, they have insectaries that are 0.6% of the total cropping area. They are getting some suppression. Are they getting as much suppression as Woodleaf and my farm? My farm biodesign, I basically stopped spraying in 2001 and never sprayed again till I sold the farm in 2010, and I hope she's not spraying now. But look at this, that's about 30 to 50% habitat. It's also my cover cropping area, isn't it? I mean that is called a living mulch, but it's also serving as a cover crop, isn't it? So it's doing dual purposes: soil fertility building and organic matter foundation building and habitat building. But how much do we need of that to get varying degrees of suppression? One of the farms that I'm working with is 300 acres and is clean cultivation. They are, every 9th or 11th plant, they're planting different habitat plants like alyssum or white dill, and they're getting suppression. As much suppression as these extreme farms? No. So I think that we can incrementally move towards what you're asking, that we can have some suppression to lots of suppression. And if we're going to have this kind of farm, what's the conclusion? You can probably already see it with these small types of farms in a little more marginal. My soil was way better than Carl's when I began, but was still considered marginal farmland for Montana. You need a lot more farmers.
How have you found that your neighbors, either in Montana or in the Sacramento Valley, other farmers, are they receptive to what you're doing?
We kind of say what we do, I don't know, I think we did 7 talks this spring, so people want to hear about it, and I think people take pieces of it. It's, I don't know. I mean, I've always been, it's like, this is what I do, it changes all the time, next year it'll be something different, a little bit different, it doesn't change that much. They're receptive, and yet, it's a stretch to just let everything go wild. And I think farmers tend to, be on their schedule of, and we haven't sprayed bloom spray this year because it's dry. It's just like I go with, why am I doing these things? I don't go by prescription farming. It's just like I go with, it has to kind of make sense. And it's like, okay, we talk. It's great having a farmer partner. This is like we talk about, when, what, and so. But always, I think both of us have been, it's like, how do we do it the most ecological? That's our bent. That's what we're trying to figure out. I think most farmers are probably more how much can they make. If they, if I sprayed more, I have no doubt I would make more money. But then would I kill off my, well, now I'm not actually so sure, because now the whole system is working pretty darn well. And we're leaving things alone. The Drosophila story that Helen was talking about, we had it in our baby kiwis last year in 2013 and lost every one. And then, okay, we're going to spray our baby kiwis this year. Well, we hadn't sprayed anything else, and we only have three vines and get 300 or 400 pounds. So no, we're not. And so we had a little bit of damage at the beginning in those baby kiwis. And then, I don't know what came in, but something came in and the Drosophila is gone, or the weather changed, or who knows. But our hands-off approach to let's find out what's going to happen, and maybe something will come in. And Drosophila, nobody's figured out, what it is that's a predator for it. But, maybe of all the farms, maybe we're a good one to kind of like get somebody to really look at what's happening with Drosophila, because that's the #1 pest in the U.S. right now, and so it's a big deal. And so, people spray for it, and so that we don't. We'll spray our cherries if we need to, if we have a good crop this year. We didn't have much of a crop,
but we won't spray our peaches. I can almost surely guarantee that we won't, because as the person who does the weekly monitoring, our predator populations are so high as we work on that management, as we pay attention when to mow, when to do certain things, that it would take a new pest for us to start spraying the main crops, peaches, apples, and pears. And then I wanted to answer your question in relation to Montana. So my neighbors were all ranchers, and they really liked tomatoes. And it turned out that, it's not saying much, but I was one of the largest field-grown tomato growers in Montana, which is kind of a joke, but true. And so I just got awe because they didn't think I could do that. Plus, the yield and the money per acre compared to wheat and alfalfa was much higher. So people really liked what I was doing, and I did have an incubation farmer who came and worked on my place and had his own little acre. And he went off and started to do a similar system, and then recently has moved a little bit away from that. And I haven't, there's some things you just don't ask. Wow, is that all the questions? Oh, here's
There
one.
we got one.
We actually spoke just a little bit before the lecture, and you said something kind of marvelous. You said sometimes you feel, I've lost my faith in science, by which I think you meant that it's very difficult to know things with any absolute durable certainty. And it's a little surprising with the accumulated wisdom sitting on the stage in front of us. It's just so extraordinary, and yet you are constantly saying we need to study this more. We need to know more about this. You've just encouraged a couple of people to write research grants. We don't know very much, I take it. How much do we know? How much do we not know?
Well, Helen will speak to this more, but I keep telling her to go with your instinct on all of this stuff. It's like, what do you think is going on? And forget about, because the scientists, we go to all these scientific meetings because she's part of a group studying all of this. They never agree, I don't think. They rarely agree in any case. So it's just like, don't even listen to that. What do you think? And so just go with, there's a belief system that's got to be part of this. Anyway.
I think that biology is very flexible, and just like genetics, you can have very genetically plastic systems. I think that we can make a lot of mistakes, and that we can have half-truths and still get away with working. When I look at some of the things I did on my farm 20 years ago, I just have to shake my head and think about my very steep learning curve, but I got away with it. I had good yields. So is that a measure of success? One of the reasons I think, well, there's two reasons I think that we don't have all the answers. Number one, it's that classic elephant story with the three blind men. Okay, so in my world, the three blind men, one is a plant pathologist, one is an entomologist, and one is a soil scientist. And the soil scientist is looking at the trunk and saying, this is what the organic system is. And the plant pathologist has the tail. And meanwhile, the farmer is underneath blind trying to lift the whole elephant up, and it's overwhelming. So we just need to know more. I actually believe in agroecosystem study. And you're going to have Stephen Gleesman here, who's one of my heroes, to speak. There's another, Stephen Gleesman doesn't know that I have followed him, but I've read everything. So there's another person who has been an influence on me, and someone here, actually, Miguel Altieri. I got in trouble in my first job at Rutgers University because of his work. So I think that we keep learning, we keep understanding the complexity of the system, we get tools that let us see more. I mean, it used to be that we thought mycorrhizae were the best thing. It's just because they're big. We can see them. Now we're learning more. But organic matter, we should know more about humus and organic matter and how to manage it, and we should have universal truths on that in my mind. And I guess I'm going to have to learn to go with my gut instinct the way Carl does. That's a good question.
How do you handle frost? If you have frost, like with your peach trees, like I know in the Central Valley they use wind machines. How do you handle frost if you've come across it?
I've been working for 10 years on this great video. We do YouTube videos of how we farm. And so it shows all the systems. And so lately our system has been, we've just been spending money on covers. And so we have 14-foot wide covers that go down. We have 200-foot long rows. And so we put up a simple, just a T-post with a piece of rebar that's kind of arched, and it just goes over the top and gets tied down at the trees. And we have right now, I think, 8 rows covered, no chance of frost, but the wind hasn't been bad enough to take them down, so we're just going to leave them up and see what happens if they stay up. That's our main line of defense for the coldest fields, and that should give us 6 degrees of protection from frost that's dropping down. If there's a breeze, it'll still give us probably 4 degrees of protection. So that's an easy one, except for it's expensive, but that should last a good long time. I have wind machines, 4 of them, so I have to have 4 tractors that run the PTOs that run the wind machines, and they have like a helicopter blade that's just pulling air off of the ground and then pulling it up. And so those are running all night when it's, below, well, pretty much I start them at about 32 degrees, and so if it pulls down to right now 28, and the fruit would not get too much damage, but in another week or so it's going to be more tender. 28 will start hurting the crop. So those wind machines, we keep the orchard mowed pretty well so that everything's on at least a slight slope, and sometimes even a little more. And so the air drainage goes down, the wind machines are at the bottom, and they just push everything up. So as long as that frost is moving, you can get 2 degrees or 3 degrees of protection at most out of that system. So sometimes it's not enough. The covering's going to be the best. And then one year we tried small fires, just little bitty fires, just around the tops of the trees, and the only crop in that field, it was one of the coldest fields, it was the only crop we got was where those little fires were. Well, that's probably not the best idea, is to make a ton of fires in this world anymore, but it worked. And so it was like, it wouldn't always work. We'd tried it one other time years earlier and it didn't work. So frost is an interesting one, and you get to stay up when nobody else is all night a lot of times. Yeah, we're trying all kinds of things.
Well, I have some questions of you if you don't have any more questions. Can I ask him a couple of questions, Gary?
Maybe not answer.
So I want to know, I'm going to be kept up late at night from her question about how we make food more accessible to everyone at every income, and how we encourage farmers to take more of an ecological approach. So as consumers, I want to know how many of you shop at the many Berkeley farmers markets?
Yay.
Okay, good. And do you think that the prices at the Berkeley farmers markets are, how many think reasonable? How many think excessive? Yeah, so they are, yeah. Most, I have to say, since nobody is seeing what I'm seeing, that I would say about 60% said reasonable, and about 25% said excessive, and then we had some folks from the first that didn't raise their hand the second time. So maybe you can shout out, what can we do as farmers to make it easier for everyone to get produce at farmers market? What can we do to be more accessible? What, in your idea, as non-farmers, and Carl will laugh at you, but I won't, what do you think we should do?
No, we want to.
No, once you raise your hand, you have to talk to everyone. Resistance is futile.
I think something that has been brought up a lot in this class that I think it's important for us all to think about is not saying what can you do as much as what can we all support. And I think raising the minimum wage is a huge piece of how we can solve this problem without putting it on farmers. So I say, just as citizens, support raising minimum wage wherever you can.
Any other ideas?
Extend the hours of farmers markets to be later at night.
Ah.
I like it.
Have CSAs at schools.
Have CSAs at schools, yeah. And so probably you mean that the farmer would have a school as part of their CSA. I think that's a great idea. We would love to do a CS, well, maybe we, never mind, sorry.
I think that with the Farm Bill and the way that we fund agriculture, we tend to encourage overproduction and monocropping, and I think that we need to shift the paradigms that we use to think about farming in terms of what our goals are in terms of the government. And you guys were mentioning a lot of the sort of food safety regulations that you guys are facing, and I think that this is all sort of encouraging the same type of agriculture. So I think we should be funding a broader system of agriculture, and I think that that's a lot of I think that was one of the biggest driving forces in terms of transforming the farming landscape.
I want to address it. I think that's a really good point, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because in both Carl's system and my system, compared to the large farm that I worked with, we have very little waste, very little throwaway. I mean, it's remarkable how little we have. And the larger farm that I worked with, it was heartbreaking how much waste we had returned from farmers market, or CSA boxes that didn't get picked up, or back to the food safety thing again, zero tolerance for any insects. We had an entire truckload of romaine lettuce refused from a store that you wouldn't expect it from, but will remain nameless. Because they found two aphids in cases and cases and cases of romaine. So that's one way to help. If a farmer is putting into his prices a whole load being rejected, then that's expensive.
This is actually going off of that, kind of piggybacking off of that question. I know in France they have these markets. They sell inglorious fruits and vegetables that are imperfect, and they've just taken off. Like they're very popular. And I saw that you had that posting for the peaches that you eat by candlelight. But I think that's also going with monocultures, that people expect, the general public expects these perfect, not necessarily more like helpful or nutritious, but they expect this visible quality that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. And I think that like having that fruit that's less expensive would definitely deter a lot of waste, like they do in these markets that have just like taken off. And PR actually did a piece on it as well. So I think that's excellent.
Do you want to talk about how well you have done with?
Well, a large percentage, 10% is what it showed, but actually all the small fruits go there too, and all the ones that, they're just misshapen, it might be clean fruit, but it isn't, 10% isn't what we sell as our number ones. So we have, probably 20 or even more percent that we sell as off-grade, and some of that is actually, pretty cheap, and then others is just half the price of the full price or even a little more. But that's pretty rare at farmers markets that other farms do that. They have their first grade maybe isn't quite as nice looking as our first grade because we do, separate it, so they maybe push a little bit in that way. But we've had pushback from the counties, just saying, oh, your off grade is too off. And so, what are the parameters? And then they said, oh, and they show us the paperwork that says has to be pretty darn, non-blemished. You can't hardly have any scarring even. And then we pushed back, and we, so far we haven't been kicked out of any markets because of it. But it's, same as food safety. It's like, where is the line of what is okay? And so, just the premier number one quality, according to their books is. So it's tricky. It's a tricky subject, we like being able to do it. It would actually cut into our bottom line quite a bit if we didn't. And so I think Gary's here.
He's going to kick us off the train.
Wolf is at the door. We're just about out of time. Was there one last question or something?
There was one up there. Oh, there we go.
Sure.
Okay, you got the mic.
I just had one last question, which is in the industrial agricultural system. How do you think the structure, you're talking about a lot of regulations, favors large farms, and what kinds of things can be put in place to encourage small farms such as yourself? And if we have time, if you were young farmers starting out today, would you be able to do what you've done, and would you do it differently?
Boy, I mean, the last question first is, I love farming. I'm glad that I'm doing it. It's a lot of work, but it's a varied, pattern. It works for me. I would have a hard time doing one same thing. And when I worked at a lumber mill for years to set up this farm, I hated it. But I needed to make money, but I got out of there as fast as I could to do farming. It's more varied. It's possible to do it still, but it's difficult. I would have said 5 years ago the land prices were the same in our area as when I bought there 30 years earlier, but now they've doubled from that, and it was 40 cents a gallon for fuel, and now it's $4 almost. So so things change, and the expenses are higher. But we were at 40 cents a pound for peaches, and we're 8 times that now. So that went up too. So it's more possible. I'd say it's possible. Somebody's really got to like to work if they're going to do it and make it happen. But I think it's what we're going to have to go to in a society is that people tend land. Maybe it isn't their whole income, but a bigger piece of their income. And do you want to speak to any of that?
Well, I think it is a really important question. How do you encourage small farms? And I think there's so many programs out there for beginning farmers and for encouraging people to start farms, and yet we're not quite getting it yet. I think what does happen is that, believe it or not, we're starting to see with all the farmers that I'm working with in California, even in Montana and Oregon, that a lot of the farmers who've done CSAs and have done farmers markets are now finding them too competitive, that we've done too well for small farmers like us. So I think we need to figure out how to encourage better marketing, because yes, we're clearly not getting the food to the people who want it, but we may already be getting to the point where the farmers market model is, we can't take on a lot more farmers. So where do we go? How do we get good prices for farmers so that a lot of small farmers will continue? That's one of the important things.
We should probably stop on that note, and do bring your questions up afterward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.